Upon arriving back on the eve of the apocalypse, the man's initial action was to eliminate each and every cow that lived on his family's farm. The cows represented the foundation of the Joe family's way of life. The villagers who witnessed the scene stood frozen in disbelief, murmuring among themselves that he had lost his mind entirely. His former girlfriend lingered close, ridiculing him as she pointed out that, even with the sale of every cow he owned, the total would still fall short of the $80,000 needed for her dowry. She explained that she had already secured a wealthy boyfriend to take care of things, and suggested that giving up would be the best option. Before she had a chance to finish speaking, interrupted her sharply. He dismissed her, telling her not to bother him, insisting that his time was too valuable to waste, especially since he had more important things to do, like tending to the cows. He realized that nobody nearby would be able to comprehend how he felt. Only he was aware that, in just 3 hours, chaos would descend upon them all. The beginning of the end would not involve people. Instead, it would begin with the creatures of the animal world. The livestock were the first to change, becoming savage and aggressive as they began to hunt and attack every living creature around them. If the virus jumped to humans, its rapid transmission would outpace all expectations, leading to the collapse of the world in less than a month. In his previous life, he had been powerless, forced to witness the loss of his loved ones right before his eyes. Determined to change his fate, he made a promise to himself that he would never allow such a tragedy to repeat. At that moment, Joshua's parents rushed in, their faces filled with worry. His father raised his voice in frustration, demanding to know what was happening. He urged his son to discuss any issues openly instead of resorting to drastic actions, questioning how their family could survive if all their livestock were slaughtered.
Lately, I've had a strong addiction to watching manhwa and manga recap videos. Every single day, I find myself binging one after another, losing hours and days doing absolutely nothing productive. And honestly, it's getting out of hand. So, maybe we can make these viral videos too. I mean, look at the views, the growth, the community these creators are building. It looks simple, right? But that's a trap. You go down this endless rabbit hole spending money, losing sleep, hiring editors and writers from Fiverr and Upwork, and still feel like you've been robbed. Because don't forget how emotional the YouTube algorithm can be with making videos go viral. It's unpredictable, especially when the market's saturated, competition's relentless, and somehow other creators are dropping 10-hour videos daily while you're stuck trying to finish one. That's when I realized something had to change. So, I built the solution, the Webtoon Narrative Suite, a complete one-click system that handles everything from cropping, script narration, text-to-speech, image processing, and full video generation in one smooth process. Save money, reduce hours of work, and have a tool that only gives you straight results. Click on the link down below and experience it for yourself. And if you want even more tools to supercharge your YouTube recap journey, visit my Ko-Fi and Patreon pages where I drop weekly new tools designed to keep you ahead as AI continues to steal our jobs. So tap in now before you get left behind.
As soon as Joshua recognized their voices, he stood motionless. The knife fell from his grasp, hitting the floor with a sharp clang. He hurried ahead and wrapped his arms tightly around the others. His voice shook with emotion as he expressed how happy he was to see the other person again. With unwavering determination, the character silently vowed to shield their loved one from any harm, promising to keep them safe regardless of the obstacles ahead. His parents looked at him with bewildered expressions, unable to understand why he was acting so oddly. Joshua, however, continued on undeterred, making his thoughts known. There was no opportunity for explanations. Trust was the only option. Urgency filled the air as the decision was made to slaughter all the cattle immediately and sell the meat, knowing that every second was critical. His father gazed into his son's eyes, paused briefly as if weighing his decision, and then gave a small nod, signaling his trust in him. Because his son was the sole person in the village to have completed college, the villagers believed he must possess knowledge that they lacked whenever he acted with such determination. His mother let out a deep sigh, pulled up her sleeves, and without saying a word, began helping with the butchering. The crowd watched in shock, unable to believe what they were seeing, silently questioning whether the entire family had gone mad. Glanced at the clock, realizing there were just a few hours remaining before everything unraveled. He faced the crowd and called out, asking for 3 volunteers to help butcher the cattle, promising 800 yuan in cash to each person who stepped forward. The men who had been loafing nearby suddenly became alert, jostling and shouting as they competed eagerly for an opportunity to make some fast cash. Immediately contacted a nearby butcher and offered to sell all the beef for half its usual price. The only requirement was that payment had to be made quickly and only in cash. His parents stood quietly, their hearts heavy, as they saw the cattle they had cared for over the years quickly turned into profit and butchered for meat. Offered no explanation as he hurriedly shoved the money into his pocket, announcing his need to leave for town before anyone could question him. Before departing, he paused and looked back at them, giving a clear instruction to remain indoors. He emphasized that, regardless of any sounds they might hear, they should not open the gate and must wait for his return. He climbed into the truck and quickly drove away, leaving a trail of dust behind as he hurried down the rough dirt road. His first destination was a store where he purchased every self-defense item he could get his hands on. He stormed into the pharmacy and emptied the shelves, taking every emergency supply and all the stock he could find. Despite everything, the one thing when still desperately needed above all else was gunpowder. In the beginning of the apocalypse, he understood that those armed with weapons were the ones who held power over others. He used his remaining money to visit a modest factory that appeared to produce fireworks at first glance. Yet in secret, they secretly traded in forbidden black powder. It turned out that the person running the place was the very same guy who had taken his girlfriend. Joshua entered the room and forcefully dropped a duffel bag overflowing with money onto the table. Lynn arched her eyebrow in surprise before breaking into laughter. She noticed who had returned and couldn't help but tease, clearly aware that he remained preoccupied with thoughts of that girl. The character noticed the dowry money and wondered aloud if someone was attempting to regain favor by using explosives. Joe's face remained completely unchanged, showing no reaction. He had arrived strictly for business, immediately asking how much powder was left and stating his intention to purchase the entire supply. His cheerful expression vanished, replaced by a sudden tension in his demeanor. Wariness crept into his voice as he insisted that their company operated, steering clear of any suspicious or illegal activities. His lips curled into a smug smile as he questioned the certainty of the situation. He reminded everyone about the previous year, when a woman wearing a blue coat had been discovered near the back mountain. With a hint of sarcasm, he wondered aloud if he should unearth her and find out what truly happened. His complexion turned ashen, and sweat began to gather on his brow. Following an extended silence, he shifted his attention to the woman at his side and instructed Lee Chin to escort the man to the storage area. As walked away, reclined and let out a chilly, amused laugh. Someone had discovered his hidden secret, and a cold glint appeared in his narrowed eyes. He silently concluded that the person who found out would not remain alive for much longer. Joshua came back home carrying his supplies and immediately sought his older brother, asking for help to unload them. His brother brought troubling news. Their younger sister, who was attending school in the city, still had not returned home, stood motionless, overwhelmed by shock. In the life he remembered before this, she would have already returned home at this hour. He wondered if the choices he made earlier had set off unexpected changes in the timeline. Now, just half an hour remained until the chaos would start. Without hesitating further, he climbed into the truck and drove quickly toward the town. He yelled over his shoulder, warning them not to step outside. He insisted that, regardless of any noises they might hear, they must keep the door closed until he returned. The sound of screeching tires filled the air when he slammed his foot on the accelerator, speeding in the direction of the school. He understood that at the outset, infections usually began with animals. However, he realized that schools, crowded with students, would become chaos once the illness spread there. Without warning, the truck lurched sharply, as though it had collided with an unseen obstacle, brought the vehicle to an abrupt stop, and quickly jumped out to investigate. A grotesquely altered dog sprawled across the pavement, its body convulsing as sinister, crimson eyes gleamed in the darkness. Vicious fangs oozed with viscous, inky liquid, a chilling sign that the outbreak had already started. At the same time, word spread rapidly throughout Hai that had killed his cattle. Joe, his little sister, quickly gained a reputation throughout the school as the odd one out. During class, Lee noticed that Joe remained silent, which gave her the confidence to speak more boldly with each passing word. She waved her phone in the air with a sneer, mocking the other girl's family. In her thoughts, she ridiculed them for being crazy, recalling how the older brother from college had slaughtered every cow just so he could marry a girl from the village. To her, the whole situation seemed utterly pathetic. Joe lost her temper in an instant. With a sharp motion, she struck her desk and sent Lee's phone flying from his grasp. At that moment, the teacher entered the room, noticed the chaos, and silently took the phone away. Once class ended, Joe remained in the classroom to tidy up, unaware that Lee was waiting to catch her off guard. She forcefully pushed the girl down, then reached for a utility knife. Accusing her of breaking her phone, she called her a freak and threatened that it was time to face the consequences. Just as she was about to react, her body was seized by intense convulsions. Suddenly, a stream of dark, inky blood erupted from her mouth. She fell to the ground, gasping for air as violent retching her, let out a terrified scream, and overwhelmed by fear, hurried shakily toward the hallway. The whole school had erupted into disorder. Agonized shouts, desperate pleas, and terrifying noises filled every hallway, creating an atmosphere of absolute fear. Struggled to comprehend the rapid events unfolding around him. A classmate transformed into a zombie with wide, popping eyes and a gaping mouth ripped open, sprang toward her. She crumpled to the ground, paralyzed by fear and unable to move. The zombie mist slammed into the earth, landing with a gruesome, bone-jarring thud. At that moment, Lee emerged unsteadily from the classroom, her transformation now complete, her frame contorted in an unnatural way, while a disturbing smile stretched wide across her features. A piercing scream escaped her lips as she rushed directly toward Joe. Just before the collision occurred, with a sudden burst of energy, Joe appeared at the perfect moment and launched a powerful flying kick. The Force sent Ya, who was known for her saintly demeanor, tumbling down the hallway before crashing through a window. The second zombie rose to its feet once more. Joshua acted without a moment's pause, swiftly unsheathing his short blade in a single, fluid movement. In one swift movement, the shining blade sliced through the air, sending the zombie's head tumbling to the ground moments before its body collapsed. Turned to find his younger sister, standing there with tears streaming down her cheeks and her body shaking with fear. In an attempt to ease the tension, he playfully remarked that her screams had been loud enough to be heard from the neighboring town. The entire school had fallen into chaos, with terrified cries ringing out from all sides. Joshua reached out and clasped her hand, urging her to hurry. Without pausing, he signaled that they couldn't afford to lose a moment. Together, they dashed toward the parking lot at full speed. Inside the car, managed a nervous grin, her hands trembling slightly. The recent events had left her rattled, making her wonder if they had somehow stumbled onto the set of a horror film. Doubt crept into her mind as she questioned whether everything around them was real or just part of a terrifying scene. Joshua looked in her direction, immediately recognizing the act she was putting on. He addressed her with a soft tone, reassuring her that it was okay to let her emotions show. He reminded her that everything around them had changed, and now they both needed to figure out how to adapt to this new reality. Mom, Dad, and her older brother had all returned home unharmed. His lips curled into a faint, fragile smile at last. Meanwhile, in their quiet village, trouble was quietly growing beneath the surface of apparent tranquility. After reaching home and making sure that all were unharmed, gave a satisfied nod. He quietly expressed his need to search for someone. Joe intervened before his mother could voice her objections. She demanded his release, her tone steady and unwavering. After escaping in fear, the girl realized with certainty that her brother had changed and was no longer the person she once knew. Sensed a mysterious force awakening deep inside him. An unfamiliar energy began to swell, emerging from the turmoil in his heart. This power was wild and uncontrolled, yet it brimmed with endless potential. His mind wandered back to memories of someone from another lifetime, a solitary fighter, moving silently and swiftly, slicing through the swarm of zombies as if he were nothing more than a shadow. He believed that meeting that man in his current life would give him a powerful and irreplaceable supporter. At the same time, inside the village committee building, leaned her whole weight against the door, determined to keep it shut. In her mind, she thought the villagers were simply frightened and hadn't yet realized how serious the danger really was. Without warning, a massive hand, colored a dull mix of gray and blue, burst violently through the wooden door with a resounding crack. Within moments, a horde of bloodied zombies burst inside, baring their teeth and swiping with ragged hands. The village officials remained motionless, paralyzed by fear and utterly overpowered by the situation. At the moment when despair hung in the air, the sound of breaking glass filled the room as the windows burst apart. Lunged forward, her sword catching the light as she moved. With swift, fluid strikes, she cut down the zombies in quick succession, each one collapsing as she passed. He hurried over too, carefully cradling her face in his hands, as he looked for any indication that she might be infected. He finally relaxed, exhaling softly, once he realized there were no signs of injury or blood. In his previous life, he had known her as a distant and authoritative figure, someone who always seemed beyond anyone's reach. Despite her usual strength, she appeared delicate in that moment, possessing a vulnerability that seemed almost human. At that moment, the man wearing glasses raised his voice, demanding to know why the others had been killed, reminding everyone that those victims had been their neighbors and people they had known for many years. Joshua took a deep breath, working to steady his nerves as he reminded himself that the beings before him had lost their humanity. A single bite or just a trace of contaminated blood was enough to cause the change. In an instant, they had become zombies. The man pushed his glasses up his nose, his tone becoming more animated as he dismissed the idea of zombies. He insisted that the figure was simply old, who was searching for his lost granddaughter. They decided it would be best to contact the police, believing the authorities were better equipped to manage the situation. Just then, emerged from the back room, a self-satisfied grin spreading across her face as she began to clap in an exaggeratedly slow rhythm. He rolled his eyes, clearly unimpressed, and remarked sarcastically about the supposed toughness on display. Then he questioned whether wild accusations about government conspiracies would come next. With a dismissive scoff, He brushed off any mention of zombies, suggesting the other person had spent too much time lost in web novels. His sarcastic voice transformed the crowd's fear into anger. A few people began to yell demands that Joe be restrained and given to the authorities. Right before things could spiral out of control, moved to the front and raised her voice, demanding that everyone stop. She reminded them that had just rescued the entire group. Whether the others believed it or not, insisted that the villagers' behavior had become inhuman. Looked at it with eyes full of appreciation. He addressed them with determination, insisting that if they remained doubtful, he could reveal the truth to them. He suggested they make their way to the forest beyond the mountain. Squinted, suspicion growing in his gaze. He had observed Joe acting oddly around town, gathering weapons and stocking up on resources. At this point, was nearly convinced that Joe was hiding some important knowledge. His thoughts darkened as she considered the possibility that Joshua possessed evidence against her. She resolved that, regardless of the cost, he could not be allowed to live. Wearing a forced grin, he rounded up several of his, insisting he would join them, claiming it was only to be cautious. Stepped forward to volunteer, her concern for the villagers clearly weighing on her mind. Tao, the man with glasses, also offered to help, driven by the fact that his wife was still missing and he had received no news about her. Earlier that day, the village head had left to look into the recent disappearances, but had yet to come back. As the group arrived at the rear side of the mountain, they soon spotted his deserted car, stationed near the edge of the woods. Placed a hand on the hood and noticed that it retained its warmth. He quietly remarked to himself that the other person had not been away for very long, his gaze sharpening as his eyes narrowed. Fragments of memories from his previous life started to fall into place. The group realized that if events repeated themselves, the forest could become the starting point of the initial zombie outbreak. Despite searching the whole mountain thoroughly, they came up empty-handed. Up until that moment, had not seen the peculiar cave opening concealed between the rocks. Blood soaked the earth, filling the air with the foul stench of decay. Every detail made it clear that zombies had recently moved through the area. George stated in a calm, even tone that he would go inside to take a look. GS narrowed his eyes with a mocking grin, instantly casting suspicion. He implied that perhaps the other person was simply going inside to get rid of any proof. He questioned whether they were trying to cover up their own wrongdoing in that place. Joe received a frosty look, a silent warning in the air. If fear held him back, he was expected to remain behind. But if he chose to proceed, he would need to follow silently without protest. As moved closer to the cave entrance, someone suddenly sprang out from the darkness. Tao expressed his happiness by raising his voice in excitement. He recognized the woman as his long-lost wife and hurried toward her, reaching out in eager anticipation. In an instant, flashed her teeth and lunged directly at his neck, warned everyone to keep their hands away from her. In an instant, he lunged ahead and thrust his sword into the space between her jaws. He acted instantly, plunging the knife with force and bringing her life to a sudden end. He glanced over at Tao to assess his reaction. The man cried out in agony and lashed out at him with a wooden stick. He accused the other person of being responsible for his wife's death, blaming them for her murder. With a stern expression and without a word, forced him down to the ground. Remained composed, speaking in a deep, steady tone. He understood the pain in the air, but reminded everyone that was already lost. As she turned away, he explained that he had no other option and was only trying to protect those who were left. Taos pushed himself upright, his body trembling with a mix of sorrow and fury. Grief weighed heavily in his words as he challenged the others, questioning if they would remain composed if they had to witness the loss of their own family right before their eyes. The phrase Joe struck him sharply, leaving an impact as sudden and stinging as a slap. Memories from his previous life surged through his thoughts, filled with haunting images of his loved ones' lifeless bodies, their forms battered and blood-stained. His breathing faltered for a moment before he let out a low growl and seized Tao, lifting him effortlessly off the ground as if he were weightless. His gaze hardened, becoming as piercing as steel. In his mind, he vowed that no one would ever endanger his family and escape unscathed. He lifted his sword, his voice interrupted from nearby, her laughter carrying a mocking edge, as she remarked that perhaps he was not as different from the monsters as he believed. In that moment, someone's firm grip caught his wrist, halting his attack before it could land. BM had only just forced him down, sending him crashing hard onto the ground. A recognizable voice growled harshly, urging the listener to pull themselves together and stop acting foolish. Zhou Ming stood over him, his expression serious yet unwavering, embodying the protective presence of an older brother. Zhou Ming fixed his gaze on Tao, who remained trapped in the sorrowful aftermath of his wife's loss. He unexpectedly raised his voice, insisting that everyone had witnessed the transformation she underwent, and emphasized that none of them had wished for this outcome. He accepted responsibility for her death, urging others to hold him accountable as well. At that moment, the village leader struggled to regain composure, reminded of their responsibility to the community. Despite the turmoil, the villagers continued to rely on their guidance. Tao's hands curled into tight fists as he shook, his whole body tense. After a moment of struggle, he managed a hesitant, shaky nod and the strained atmosphere seemed to melt away. At that moment, a weak voice calling for help echoed from inside the cave. The cry belonged to the village chief. Joshua came to an abrupt halt, his expression tightening with suspicion. An uncanny sensation washed over him. The voice's steady cadence felt unnaturally precise, almost as if it were mimicking real emotion. One of Lin's GS showed his annoyance by rolling his eyes and letting out a dismissive scoff. He thought to himself that the others were acting like frightened children, and decided he would be the one to pull the target out on his own. He marched confidently into the cave. He barely managed a few steps before a sharp, wet slice shattered the quiet. S.A.'s body was suddenly severed at the waist, sending a spray of blood in every direction. A deformed zombie pulled its upper body from the wreckage and tossed it away with careless disregard, treating it as if it were nothing more than garbage. Behind the figure, countless pairs of crimson eyes pierced through the shadows, signaling that the horde had risen from their slumber. Joshua's expectations shattered as he took in the scene before him. An overwhelming, countless horde of undead surged out from the cave, far surpassing anything he had pictured. Despite his ability to fight his way free, he wondered how he could possibly keep both Summer and his brother safe at the same time. Since they were young, the Joe brothers had been taught by a former military martial arts expert. Their abilities had grown so advanced that they could hold their own against seasoned professionals. Joshua advised caution, explaining that their heads were the most vulnerable and that they reacted strongly to bright light. The brothers acted as a single unit, their movements fluid as they struck and evaded, sweeping away any threats nearby in just a few minutes. At the same time, had darted behind a tree, paralyzed by fear and hardly daring to take a breath. However, from the depths of the cave, that unsettling plea for assistance reverberated once more. Joe met Joe Ming's eyes, and a silent understanding passed between them. Joshua spoke with resolve, instructing the others to return because the path ahead was too perilous. He warned that if they continued, they would only hinder the group's progress. Without pausing, the pair moved forward and disappeared into the shadows. Progress was suddenly halted when he came upon a lifeless body sprawled on the ground. The remains were shriveled and empty, with the heart entirely gone. The mysterious voice echoed once more, its unnatural whispers drifting eerily through the air. Joe Ming lifted his flashlight and moved its beam slowly over the cave's shadowy interior. The village chief sat facing away from them, motionless and quiet. He spun abruptly, his complexion ghostly and his gaze vacant. Suddenly, tendrils started to emerge from his chest. With a burst of alarming speed, the creature hurled itself toward the group, its movements filled with menace. Acted without thinking, swinging his sword swiftly at the creature's head. As soon as the blade made contact, he sensed that something was amiss. The creature hardly reacted at all. Clearly, this was no ordinary zombie. What stood before them was a mutant. Without warning, tentacles lashed out, striking Joe and hurling him forcefully against the cave wall. Directed the beam of the flashlight toward the creature, illuminating its face. The creature let out a piercing screech and jerked backward, shrinking away from the sudden brightness. They took advantage of an opportunity and hurriedly escaped from the cave. Still struggling to catch his breath, Joe Ming glanced at his brother in shock, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The mysterious creature left him reeling with disbelief. Joshua released a measured breath, his mind racing with realization. He suspected that what they faced was more than just the usual threat. A new infection had emerged, blending animal and human genes through some unpredictable genetic mix. The danger had grown beyond ordinary undead. It had taken on a more advanced and terrifying form. He gestured toward the shadowy mouth of the mine, suggesting his suspicion that a colony of mutated bats might be lurking inside. In his mind, the creature they had seen was a more advanced mutation, likely having once been the village chief. Joshua lifted his gaze toward the glowing full moon, silently noting how its brightness worked in his favor. He remembered that the creatures lurking in the shadows were afraid of light, and realized they would be reluctant to emerge on a night so illuminated. Joe Ming stared at him with wide eyes, clearly shocked. He wondered when the other person had suddenly become an expert in viruses. With a half smirk and a casual shrug, the character made a joking remark, admitting that perhaps they had watched a few too many documentaries before everything had fallen apart. They were on the verge of leaving, intending to come back the following day equipped with the right tools to handle the mutant. Without warning, dozens of mutated bats with glowing red eyes erupted from the cave in a chaotic swarm. The sky quickly turned black as enormous wings blocked out the moon's glow. Amidst the turmoil, the mutated zombie seized its chance and hurled itself forward with the force of a cannonball. It crashed into Joe Ming with overwhelming strength, knocking him off his feet and flinging him through the air. A tentacle whipped through the air, striking with enough force to break the flashlight in his hand. The creature's purpose was unmistakable. Its focus had settled solely on Joe Ming, marking him as its chosen prey. Joshua clenched his jaw and strained with every ounce of his energy, yet his efforts made no difference. The creature's strength was immense, surpassing anything a person could hope to withstand. Right before the beast could snap its jaws shut on Zhou Ming's hand, stood rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a wave of fear and powerlessness. Suddenly, a car raced unexpectedly onto the scene. The door burst wide, revealing in the driver's seat. Without a moment's doubt, she took careful aim and struck the mutated zombie with force, launching it through the air. Seized the opportunity without hesitation, surging ahead to deliver a decisive strike that brought the creature's existence to a permanent end. Upon discovering that the true identity of the monster was none other than the village chief's hands trembled and her face drained of color. Zhou Ming let out a long breath, exhaustion clear in his tone, as he admitted that their survival depended entirely on the timely arrival of his companion. Without that intervention, he believed neither of them would have made it out alive. Before anyone had a chance to recover, his complexion suddenly lost all color. He had noticed a distinct bite mark etched into the skin on Zhou Ming's lower arm. Zhou Ming managed a weak, weary smile as he looked at his younger brother. He silently apologized, letting him know that the responsibility of caring for the family would now rest on his shoulders. Without needing to say more, Zhou Ming trusted that his brother understood what the future held. Zhou felt those words cut into him with the sharpness of a knife. In his heart, he had always understood that the burden of ending his brother's pain would eventually fall to him. Gazed at his brother, who was suffering from the infection, and a heavy sense of guilt washed over him. He once thought that being given a second life would allow him to rewrite destiny and shield his loved ones. Yet now, he faced the painful reality that the same tragedies were unfolding all over again. Without warning, his gaze fixed upon the lifeless body of the mutant. He hurried to the creature and forcefully pulled the blade from its skull. Without pausing, they attacked the creature's head repeatedly, each strike sending blood flying in every direction. Zhou Ming, convinced that his brother had lost his senses from sorrow, shouted at in alarm, demanding to know what he was doing and pleading for him to stop. Reached out to him, her voice rising as she attempted to stop him from leaving. Joshua kept moving, driven by a sudden realization. He recalled that advanced zombies draw viral energy from weaker ones, compressing it into a solid core that lies concealed within their skulls. Within moments, he discovered what he was searching for, a shadowy, crimson-hued crystal hidden deep within the rear of the beast's skull. He faced Zhou Ming once more, his expression calm yet filled with hopeful intensity. He reminded Zhou Ming that change had not yet overtaken him, and insisted there was still a chance. As a final gesture, he extended the crystal toward Zhou Ming's voice sounded grave as he explained that the object was a zombie core, created from densely packed viral material. He revealed that its origin was identical to the infection inside the listener's body, cautioned that consuming the core might allow the person to develop into an immune-boosted form, but warned of the risk of transforming into a monster instead. Zhou Ming took a quick look at the item, then consumed it confidently, showing no sign of doubt. Meanwhile, Zhou paused for a moment, uncertainty flickering in his eyes, yet he recognized in his heart that this was their sole opportunity. After swallowing it, Zhou Ming let a sly grin spread across his face. He couldn't help but wonder why the remedy had been hidden all along, thinking it could have spared him so much unnecessary trouble. Now, his curiosity piqued. He waited to see how soon the effects would begin. Gave her response in a monotone just 2 days later. Zhou Ming gave a firm nod and shifted his gaze to the mouth of the cave. He instructed that if 2 days passed without his return, the entrance should be closed off. However, she warned that if she emerged with extraordinary abilities, he should resist feeling envious. As Joshua watched his brother stroll away with an air of ease, a sense of relief began to ease the tightness in his chest. Trust in his brother settled firmly within him. With a gentle curve to his lips, he softly assured that he would be waiting. Lin, concealed behind a nearby tree, had secretly listened in on the entire conversation. A wicked smile slowly formed on his lips as realization dawned on him. Understanding the situation, he accepted it with cold resolve and decided to hasten the unfolding events himself. As dawn approached and the first light crept over the horizon, charged into his room, dressed head to toe in homemade battle equipment, ready to wake with an urgent announcement that it was time to get up. Turned his head toward her, his expression filled with confusion and surrender. He silently questioned her choice of outfit, thinking she resembled a character from a poorly made science fiction costume event. Zhou watched as straightened with pride, eager to show off his work. Remembering Zhou's earlier warning about needing stronger defenses, had spent the entire night crafting a new suit of armor. Now he looked expectantly at Zhou, hoping his creation would impress. She paused, anticipating some words of approval. Instead, simply extended a finger and tapped the armor without ceremony. Zhou watched as stumbled out of the room, moving awkwardly as if he were a barrel rolling downhill. Zhou's expression remained blank and unimpressed while he silently questioned choice of protection, wondering how planned to to survive a zombie attack by simply rolling over the undead. He shook his head and walked outdoors, where he noticed his father perched on a ladder, carefully placing bricks to strengthen the wall around the courtyard. Mr. Joe noticed him and announced that it was his turn. He jumped off the wall and landed lightly on the ground. He picked up a nearby barrel of black powder, his face lighting up with a broad smile. He wondered aloud about where the powder had come from, then teased that an old man should be allowed to stash a few barrels for his own amusement. Joe let out a sigh as he noticed his father handling something dangerous, realizing it was gunpowder and not something meant for play. Mr. Joe had already hoisted the barrel onto his shoulder and was jogging off, chuckling. He teased that he only wanted one, accusing the other person of being too miserly. Joshua observed his father buzzing with excitement and silently hoped that no accidents would happen to the house. Without warning, a sharp metallic noise echoed from the side yard. He looked back and spotted his mother, balancing a frying pan on her head while gripping a trident. Her stance was firm atop a yoga roller, and nearby, his younger sister, each of her actions as they trained together, gazed at the scene before him, recognizing immediately the unmistakable bond between mother and daughter. As the realization settled in his mind, he wondered silently about their relationship. After a moment, he turned his attention to his mother and inquired whether there would be any breakfast that morning. She responded without looking up, telling him to prepare his own while she stayed focused on improving her fork skills. Bing paused in front of Joe's door, hesitating for a moment as he prepared to ring the bell. He let out another sigh, thinking he would have to rely on Uncle for a meal once again. As the door swung open from within, emerged, clearly caught off guard to find someone waiting outside. He appeared startled and questioned why anyone would be standing there. Glanced downward, uncertainty flickering across her face. After mustering her resolve, she lifted her gaze and called out in a clear voice, expressing that she required assistance. Joshua blinked, uncertain about what kind of help was being requested. At that moment, his mother appeared at the doorway. Recognizing their visitor, she greeted them with a welcoming smile and cheerfully invited them inside. Nodded courteously, expressing gratitude to while explaining that she did not intend to linger, as her purpose was to speak with Joshua. She faced him again, her expression grave as she explained that the village committee had begun preparing defenses, and things were progressing reasonably well for the time being. She continued, recalling how she had reached out to the county police station the previous night, but after that, she received no responses. By morning, there was no signal whatsoever. Glanced at his phone and saw there was no signal. A puzzled expression crossed his face as he realized this hadn't occurred before. Pressed on, tension clear in her voice as she expressed her unease. She worried that being isolated could cause them to overlook something vital, such as the arrival of reinforcements. She looked directly into his eyes, silently urging to join her for a trip to the county, determined to uncover the truth behind the situation. Remained quiet, his expression showing that words had left him unsettled. Noticing his uncertainty, gave a deep, respectful bow. She apologized, expressing her regret for what his brother had endured the previous day, and acknowledging that she was now requesting him to face yet another danger. She lifted her gaze, her expression unwavering. Determined to uncover the truth, she felt compelled to travel to the county, believing it was her duty to do so. In her mind, he stood out as the most skilled fighter she had ever met, someone with an unmatched understanding of the strange creatures they faced. Just then, Joshua's mother entered the room and softly cut in, telling Bing Bing that was enough. She expressed her gratitude, saying that if Bing Bing hadn't helped the previous day, her own son might not have returned home safely. Quickly spun around, startled by the sudden sound of a voice. Mrs. Joe assured Bing that Ming's actions had been his own decision, and urged her not to feel responsible. She gently asked Bing to stay put for a moment, then faced her son and instructed to follow her. Joshua looked over at his mother before trailing after her into their home. Inside the room, she silently searched through the contents of an aged wooden shelf. Without glancing behind her, she murmured in a gentle tone that she and his father had always been his parents, never meant to restrain him. Their role was to protect him, not burden him. She observed how he had matured, yet his younger sister continued to fret over him. She reached into her belongings and revealed a lengthy sword, its surface hidden beneath layers of worn fabric. Though the weapon bore the marks of many years, a subtle shine still danced along its sharpened edge, and moved together in step, making their way toward the county. Joe's mother remained silently by the gate, her eyes following them until they faded from sight. A subtle smile crossed her lips while she quietly reflected on the situation. In her thoughts, she considered how well those two complemented each other. Deep within the cave, Joe Ming remained motionless as he anticipated the effects of the zombie core he had recently consumed. All at once, the quiet was interrupted by the echo of approaching footsteps. Believing his brother was nearby, he parted his lips, signaling for them to wait and instructing them not to approach any further just yet. He suddenly noticed a damp sensation seeping around his boots. With a furrowed brow, he cautiously touched the surface of the liquid with his fingertip and lifted it to his nose. As soon as the scent reached him, his face shifted in alarm. He recognized the sharp odor of gasoline. Just as he was about to respond, a sudden flash of light burst to life at the entrance of the cave. A thunderous blast shattered the silence. Fire surged down the tunnel, consuming Zhou Ming in a flash of searing heat. At the same time, Zhou and traveled along the road, making their way to the county as they sought assistance. Occupied the passenger seat, her gaze fixed anxiously on the passing scenery outside. A quiet, off-pitch melody slipped from her lips as she hummed to herself. Shot a quick look to the side, internally marveling at just how completely she missed the tune. Realized she was being watched, and her cheeks grew warm with embarrassment. She admitted in a quiet voice that she tended to hum when she felt nervous, apologizing for how unpleasant it must have sounded. Joshua, however, did not share in the laughter. Instead, a peculiar sense of warmth spread through him. He could see that she was frightened, yet she continued to push herself onward despite her fear. He recognized the familiar spirit of, and silently acknowledged it to himself. Faced with a flood of unforeseen factors, he came to understand that his recollections from his previous existence would no longer be enough to guide him. He had no choice but to rely on her unique ability to sense zombies. Without any prior notice, he abruptly suggested that should move in with him. She stopped in her tracks and glanced back at him, a faint pink coloring her cheeks. In a quiet voice, she wondered aloud what reason she could possibly have for doing such a thing. Joshua remained oblivious to the shift in her voice, his mind still tangled in his own thoughts. He considered the impossibility of revealing her future abilities, certain she would dismiss the idea without a second thought. He simply explained that he needed her to be safe, admitting he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. Just as Bing Bing, cheeks still reddened, prepared to ask what he meant, the moment was interrupted. George's expression shifted into a frown as he noticed the path ahead was entirely obstructed by an enormous landslide. They hurried out of the vehicle to take a closer look. Gazing at the towering pile of wreckage, let out a weary sigh, clearly exasperated. She realized that reaching the county was impossible under these circumstances. Joshua remained silent for a moment, though anxiety simmered beneath his calm exterior. In his previous life, this road had posed no trouble, but now he sensed a difference. It wasn't just that the timing felt off. Everything about the route seemed altered. If the way ahead was truly blocked, it would spell major trouble for their supply lines in the days to come. He finally released a deep breath and signaled that it was time to return to the village, determined that they would find a solution once they got back. Gave a quiet nod, choosing not to speak. As made the journey back, their thoughts raced anxiously. Although they had gathered enough provisions to survive for the time being, there was still no sign of help and no escape route. A sense of confinement pressed in from all sides, making the world feel smaller and more suffocating. Without warning, a loud clunk echoed through the air. The vehicle lurched abruptly, its tires skidding as it drifted closer to the bridge's edge. Pressed hard on the brakes, clutching the steering wheel with tense hands, the car came to a sudden halt, its tires squealing as it barely avoided sliding over the brink. Both of them hurriedly sprang out to see what was going on. Gazed downward, her body tense with uncertainty as her words faltered in her throat, barely forming the question lingering in her mind. His expression grew tense as he noticed the danger ahead. He gestured for everyone to keep their distance, recognizing the object on the ground as a spike strip. It was clear to him that someone had deliberately placed it there. At that moment, a taunting voice rang out from overhead, drawing everyone's attention. Had apparently wasted no time getting friendly with the charming village chief, which seemed to amuse the newcomer. When the group glanced up, they spotted perched casually on the railing, idly twirling a pistol in his hand, while his gaze bore down on them with a threatening intensity. Lifted his gaze, his expression icy, silently demanding to know the other person's intentions. GS stared at the aftermath of the previous night's chaos, her mind heavy with the loss of half her crew. As their leader, she knew she couldn't simply ignore what had happened or allow such an attack to go unanswered. He leaped to the ground and began to approach them at a measured pace, each step deliberate and cautious. Faced ridicule, with others suggesting that if he truly wanted revenge, he should challenge the zombies instead of targeting them. His gaze sharpened with suspicion. He remembered how the other person had shrunk back in fear the previous night, and doubted that they possessed any real courage. That was the final straw. Fury distorted features as she glared at her opponent, her thoughts consumed by a single, violent intent. She wanted nothing more than to end him on the spot. Placed his hand with quiet confidence on the handle of his sword, a chilling smile spreading across his face as he silently dared anyone to challenge him. At the very moment when the atmosphere became unbearably tense, GS unexpectedly shifted his weapon, and without any sign, pulled the trigger in its direction. A gunshot shattered the silence, and she crumpled to the ground as a red stain spread quickly over her shirt. Joshua stood motionless, his eyes widening in shock. He shouted Snape, his voice filled with anger, and cursed at him for his cruelty. Let out a loud laugh, finally showing the excitement that had been building up inside. It was clear now that the energy of the moment had truly reached him. A wicked smile spread across his face as he considered the most effective way to cause pain by targeting those dearest to his enemy. His lips curled into a wicked smirk, with a mocking tone, reminded them of something important that nearly slipped their mind. Recounted witnessing their brother suffer a bite the night before. Knowing that they hadn't had the courage to end their brother's misery, claimed to have stepped in and taken care of it by destroying the whole mine. Joshua stood motionless, as if a sudden jolt had left him completely paralyzed. In an instant, his eyes reddened with fury. Letting out a fierce roar, he unsheathed his sword and rushed straight toward. Lin flashed a sly grin, feeling triumphant as her plan worked exactly as she had hoped. He lifted his weapon, preparing to shoot. A shadowy shape burst out from behind the tree, moving with blinding speed. There was a sickening crunch as its teeth clamped down on Sarm, tearing it away in one swift, brutal motion. Fell to the ground, writhing in pain and letting out anguished cries. Terror filled his eyes as he gazed helplessly at the monstrous being before him. Slid to a halt, startled by the unexpected turmoil erupting around him. He squinted, recognizing the creature before him as a Tier 2 zombie wolf. At the same time, in the village, Jo perched on the rooftop, her legs dangling as she wondered aloud about why Second Bro and had not returned yet. Without warning, the sound of heavy fists striking the front gate filled the air. Someone called out with urgency, demanding to know if Joshua was inside and insisting that the door be opened. Jo leaned over the edge, scanning the area for any familiar faces. She looked for brother and uncle, but her brother was nowhere to be seen. Confused, she wondered what was happening. Tao abruptly extended his arm, directing everyone's attention to the mountain ridge as he called out for them to notice something in that direction. Joanne swiftly raised her phone and activated the flashlight, directing its beam toward the darkness ahead. When the beam illuminated the hillside, she stood motionless, her eyes growing wide with shock. A seemingly endless mass of zombies poured down the hillsides, surging toward the village like a dark, unstoppable wave. At the same time, was sprawled on the floor, blood seeping from his wounds. Struggling to stay awake, he clenched his jaw and silently cursed his fate, wondering if this was truly the end for him. The zombie wolf gradually shifted its gaze, its eyes red with blood, focusing intently on Joshua. Immediately sensed danger, realizing that whatever was out there had chosen him as its target and there was no way to escape. The creature let out an ear-splitting roar and charged directly toward him, swiftly moved out of the way, reacting with incredible speed. As the creature moved past, he swung his sword, cutting a deep gash across its chest. Blood erupted in a wild burst as the zombie wolf toppled to the earth, unleashing a piercing cry of agony. Joshua paused to steady his breathing, his gaze fixed intently on the wounded creature before him. He noted with relief that the sun was setting, knowing that the beast's abilities would not be at their peak during this time. As darkness approached, the narrator realized that neither they nor Bing Bing would survive if night arrived. They understood that they needed to finish everything before sunset. Without warning, the woods erupted with a series of low, menacing howls that reverberated through the night. Jo shouted for, alerting them that an even larger horde of zombies was approaching. A sudden realization washed over him, casting a shadow across his face as he understood the truth. This wasn't just a group, it was an entire horde. He quickly shifted his focus toward the horizon, spotting a relentless horde of undead creatures flooding through the trees. The thought occurred that the village chief might have been responsible, but remembering his death only deepened the mystery. Uncertainty lingered over who else could be to blame. Suspicion shifted to the bats, as it seemed possible they were the true origin of the problem. As finally understood the situation, the zombie wolf sprang toward him, unleashing a terrifying, bone-chilling roar. The creature's claws tore through the air with savage force, intent on shredding him to pieces. Just in time, spun out of the way, barely escaping what could have been a deadly strike. His heart thundered in his chest, its pace refusing to slow. He wondered why it continued racing when it should have been fading. He suddenly became aware of something unsettling. The gash he had inflicted on the creature's chest was sealing itself, mending swiftly as he watched in disbelief. Before he had a chance to regain his balance, the creature bared its enormous teeth and sprang forward once more, determined to rip him to shreds. At the same time, far beneath the surface in the cave where Jo Ming lay entombed, the debris continued to tremble from the force of the previous blasts. A low, thunderous noise grew steadily, reverberating throughout the tunnel with increasing intensity. Suddenly, a powerful burst erupted, scattering the boulders in every direction. Within moments, Jo Ming stepped out of the swirling smoke, his entire form bathed in an unsettling red light. An icy, distorted grin slowly spread across his features. Back on the bridge, watched in terror while the zombie wolf lunged for Joshua. Fear her, and she could only manage a shaky plea for the creature to stop. As the zombie wolf's teeth closed around Joshua, an unusual crimson light burst forth from him, radiating a vibrant energy that seemed to flicker and move beneath his skin like fire. A fierce, untamed energy coursed through his body, overwhelming and unrestrained, as if every part of him was set ablaze and transformed anew. With a deep primal yell, Joshua slammed his fist directly against the creature's jaw. The zombie wolf, taken by surprise, stumbled backward after being struck with tremendous force. The creature emitted a pained wail, crimson pouring from its jaws as it collapsed onto the earth, refused to let the creature regain its footing. With eyes glowing a fierce crimson, he sprang into action, launching himself forward. He lifted his sword above his head, then brought it down in a swift, forceful motion, cutting the creature neatly into two pieces. Once the dust cleared, gazed in shock at the figure drenched in blood. Barely audible, she murmured Joe's name in utter disbelief. He faced her, a gentle smile spreading across his lips, and quietly assured her of his presence. Slumped to the ground, exhaustion weighing down her body, yet a gentle smile lingered on her lips. Relief washed over her as she found comfort in knowing the other person was safe. Gazed at the lifeless remains of the zombie wolf before shifting her attention to Joshua, who appeared composed and unshaken. A faint laugh escaped her lips as she acknowledged his incredible strength, finding herself oddly unsurprised by his abilities. Deep inside, she wondered if she had already accepted the idea that he was capable of solving any problem. Joe gazed at his hands, noticing that the energy surging inside him remained strong. The sensation thrummed within him, untamed but somehow restrained. He wondered about its origin, questioning if this marked the start of something new. However, doubts lingered in his mind. In his previous existence, awakening always required a crystal core. Yet, he realized he had never relied on one himself. He suddenly regained focus, his gaze fixing on the horde of zombies rushing in their direction. His voice became urgent as he reminded everyone that conversation could wait. Escaping was their priority. They realized they were completely surrounded, and understood that remaining in that spot would mean certain death. He noticed the wound on her leg and moved closer. Realizing she couldn't run in her condition, he offered to carry her, urging her to hold on firmly since the journey ahead would be rough. Despite the pain evident on her pale face, clenched her jaw and forced herself upright. Determination shone in her eyes as she gave a resolute nod, silently agreeing. The zombie horde surged forward, their collective growls echoing through the air like thunderous surf as they drew nearer, filling the atmosphere with an overwhelming sense of menace. Acted without delay, hoisting onto his back before racing toward the distant village as quickly as he could. The shape of the village started to appear ahead, yet the relentless undead closed in behind them, their footsteps echoing ominously like the beat of deathly drums. He shot a quick look over his shoulder, his mind racing with possibilities. The odds were overwhelming. The group outnumbered him by far. Even if he managed to defeat every opponent, keeping Bing Bing safe from harm seemed impossible. As he clenched his jaw and braced himself to continue, a thunderous roar rang out from afar. A vehicle sped through the turmoil, slicing through the disorder like a launched missile. A rugged, custom-built off-road truck barreled forward, its rear exhaust shooting outbursts of flame. The vehicle plowed through crowds of zombies, tearing through them as easily as if they were only flimsy paper. When the vehicle arrived at, the driver executed a sudden, skillful drift. The back end of the car whipped outward, unleashing a burst of fire that hurled the approaching undead skyward, instantly reducing them to smoldering ashes. The car screeched as it came to a halt. The window on the driver's side slid down and Joe's father appeared, a cigarette hanging from his mouth. A wide smile spread across his face as he called out that he had arrived to rescue Joe. In the seat next to him, Joeing waved with enthusiasm. Meanwhile, the narrator prepared to jump in and help whenever needed. After gathering everyone into the car, Joe's father pressed hard on the accelerator, speeding toward the village as fast as he could. Noticing that the undead continued to pursue them closely, he urgently called out to the gunner, instructing them to launch 3 of the signature Joe-style dragon bombs. Joe responded immediately, shouting back an acknowledgement without any hesitation. She pulled 3 homemade firebombs from her backpack and tossed them through the rear window. Flames burst out behind the group, catching several zombies on fire. Despite burning, the undead continued to charge forward, their bodies wrapped in flames. Joe's father let out a chilly snort, unimpressed by their pursuers' persistence despite being engulfed in flames. Deciding to escalate the situation, he prepared to increase their speed. He hurled a barrel filled with gunpowder through the window. With a quick motion of his hand, he sent his burning cigarette flying straight into the target. A deafening blast shattered the darkness, setting the street ablaze with roaring flames that swallowed everything in their path. Joe, sitting in the back seat with eyes gleaming, burst out in excitement, unable to contain her thrill at the wild events unfolding. Energized, she urged the group to keep moving forward. At the same time, Joe and shared a glance that spoke of their astonishment and resignation, silently agreeing that their family's antics were even more outrageous than the chaos caused by the zombies outside. His mind flashed to the hidden medical kit beneath the seat, prompting him to lean down and pull it out. At that moment, moment, he retrieved a few bandages and a tube of ointment. Joe Ings quickly took the items away from him and chastised him for his actions, making it clear that grabbing a girl's leg so abruptly was inappropriate. With a playful smirk, she hinted that there might be something happening between the two of them that she wasn't aware of. His cheeks turned pink as a quiet laugh slipped out, betraying her shyness. Meanwhile, Joshua's patience wore thin. He couldn't help but think to himself how this mischievous youngster was always causing trouble. He chose not to respond to her, and instead shifted his attention toward his father, asking about the situation at home. Joe's father watched the mirror closely and responded with a steady voice, assuring everyone that they were safe for the moment since the horde had not yet made it past the village. Joe gave a nod and shifted his gaze toward the pile of explosives in the rear. He wondered aloud if the dynamite had truly been homemade and marveled at the recklessness of smoking so close to it. Joe's father chuckled with pride as he reminisced about his past. He recalled being fascinated by explosives in his younger years and serving as the demolition specialist for his mining crew. When the mines closed and there was nothing left to detonate, he felt at a loss. He even attempted to experiment with firecrackers at home, but Joe's mother quickly put an end to that idea. With a heavy sigh, he shook his head, looking like someone who had been his life's passion. Joe's memory sparked unexpectedly, leading her to recall the kitchen explosion from the previous year. She wondered aloud if her father had been responsible for the incident. At her question, his father's posture tensed and his voice wavered as he any involvement, insisting that the idea was absurd. Joe noticed that she was squinting at him with concern. She observed that her father's hands were shaking. In a low voice, her father warned her not to mention any of this to her mother. Soon, the group reaches the entrance gate. As soon as they stepped outside, a piercing screech rang out from within the yard. Joe's father's skin lost its color as anxiety hit him. He rushed toward the door and threw his weight against it, only to find it would not budge. Panic filled his thoughts at the realization that he was trapped inside. Joshua didn't pause for even a moment. He moved ahead, lowered his body, and drove his knee into the door, forcing it open with a single, forceful blow. Within the courtyard, an astonishing scene unfolded before them. Joe's mother stood calmly, effortlessly holding a struggling zombie by the neck with just one hand. She cast a chilly glance at the creature, recognizing Auntie from the neighboring village, and remarked in an indifferent tone that it had been a long time since they last met. Joe's father and Joeing leaned around the splintered doorway, their bodies tense as they glimpsed the stormy anger on her face. Fearful, they retreated and pressed themselves against the wall, trying to remain unseen. At the same time, moved forward, hesitantly addressing his mother with a soft voice. Without lifting her gaze, she clutched her frying pan tightly and let out a low growl in the zombie's direction. She expressed her annoyance, saying that it had startled her by jumping out. Despite its new form, she insisted that becoming a zombie didn't excuse it from owing her money. Joe's mother gripped her frying pan and lashed out at the zombie woman with fierce determination. As she attacked, she unleashed a torrent of grievances, reminding the woman about their last card game and the unpaid debt of $500. She also brought up how she had generously lent $600 to the woman's son for college, but when her own eldest was accepted, the woman offered nothing in return. On top of that, the zombie woman had the audacity to spread rumors about her family. Joe's mother believed that punishment was well-deserved, gazed at the scene in disbelief, inching closer to his father. He wondered to himself when his mother had become so powerful. His father inhaled deeply on his cigarette, then reflected on how she had always behaved this way. In earlier times, his mother was known as the most formidable person across 10 villages. No group of 3 to 5 men could ever defeat her. Peace only returned once she crossed paths with him. In reality, she had insisted that they get married. A frying pan soared through the air and struck the back of his head with a heavy thud. From somewhere within the courtyard, his wife's icy voice rang out, accusing him of being the one who had pleaded for their marriage. She spun around and shot an angry look at, clearly annoyed that he had charged through the front gate in a reckless attempt to save the day. She silently vowed to deal with him once she got the chance. Joshua immediately retreated a step, attempting to slip away unnoticed. However, swiftly intervened, pleading with Auntie not to hold Joshua responsible, explaining that his actions were simply out of concern for her well-being. As soon as she spoke, Joe's mother stopped in her tracks, completely still. She gradually shifted her gaze to Bing Bing, her expression gentling in an instant, as if she had changed moods with a flicker. She seemed surprised to notice Bing Bing's presence and quickly tried to downplay her previous actions, insisting she had only been joking and that it shouldn't be taken to heart. She pointed out that Joshua, who was known for his laid-back attitude, wouldn't mind. Meanwhile, Joshua simply watched the situation unfold in silence, thinking that her performance was even more unsettling than the zombies themselves. At that moment, an eerie roar echoed from near the courtyard wall as a zombie appeared, having scaled the barrier and now shrieking uncontrollably. Just as it was about to leap down, something hit it while it was still in the air, knocking it backward and sending it tumbling back outside. Perched on the wall, Tao urgently called out for everyone to stop talking. He warned that the zombies were breaking into the village, and a large horde was charging toward their position from the west. Joachim's gaze grew intense as determination filled him. Drawing on his inner power, crimson energy flickered over his form. Without hesitation, he sprang forward and plunged into the battle. When Joshua glimpsed his father hurling explosives, his sister operating a makeshift cannon, and his mother advancing with her iron pan raised high, determination welled up inside him. For once, his whole family stood united in battle, refusing to let anyone break through their defenses. No longer facing the darkness by themselves, the character found strength in the presence of their family, believing together they could endure the deadly wave that threatened them. Without warning, the zombies at the back started moving away. Joey's eyes widened with surprise as he noticed the others retreating, wondering if perhaps fear was the reason behind their sudden withdrawal. Joe's brows knit together in displeasure as he reminded himself that zombies were incapable of experiencing fear. Almost as if responding to his thoughts, the zombies showed up again. Unlike before, they now held ladders, crowbars, and even saws in their hands. It became clear that they were working together with a plan. Joe's father gazed in disbelief, unable to comprehend what he saw. He silently questioned the reality of the situation, thinking it had to be a joke. The sight of their adversaries wielding tools made him wonder if they were under attack by zombies or facing an invading army. Joshua's tone became icy as he observed the situation. He realized that the creatures weren't behaving naturally. Instead, it was clear to him that an external force was directing their actions. In the midst of the turmoil, his eyes landed on a shadowy figure standing atop a faraway rooftop. He squinted, quickly recognizing the person everyone believed had perished in the blast now stood before them, his deformed features fixed in a chilling, icy grin as he looked down at the group. At that instant, hordes of zombies advanced on the Joe family estate, their approach as unstoppable as a crashing sea. Joe's father muttered a harsh curse under his breath, his teeth clenched tightly. Frustration filled his voice as he questioned why all the enemies seemed to be heading directly toward them. He spun around and yelled urgently about the explosives, calling out to Joe. Panic swept over Ing as she realized they had none left. Every last one had already been used. Tao's voice called out from the side, alerting everyone that a few of them were making their way in from the flank. Spun around and spotted a group of zombies climbing up the sidewall. Dread washed over him as he realized what was happening. It dawned on him that the undead were trying to distract him, now employing actual strategies. As he glanced downward, he noticed, and his parents encircled by the undead, battling fiercely with their remaining energy. The whole family was caught in a frantic fight for survival. His gaze sharpened as a crimson glow briefly shimmered in his eyes again. He instructed his parents to defend the courtyard while he handled everything else. As energy coursed through him, he sprang from the wall and plunged fearlessly into the center of the advancing crowd. Joe's father observed his son springing into the swarm, a surge of panic tightening in his chest. A strained cry escaped him, his voice trembling with fear. In an instant, the horde of zombies surged forward, engulfing under a chaotic mass of snapping jaws and grasping arms. Despite the overwhelming pressure bearing down on him, Joe Jewel remained fearless. With his eyes shut, he sensed a surge of power within, erupting fiercely like a violent volcano. Clutching his sword with determination, he snarled as his teeth pressed together. He summoned the power of the blood barrier and the force. In that moment, he activated his ability, Blood. With one swift, powerful movement, he unleashed his sword, sending a surge of red energy bursting from his body. The force tore through all nearby zombies, shattering them into scattering pieces of flesh and bone. When the blood finally stilled, Joe remained upright, catching his breath. The technique he had just used stirred a distant recollection. Long ago, in another existence, he had witnessed a warrior from the Dawn Legion, none other than the Supreme Commander Point, renowned as one of the greatest ability users of that era. That man had performed this very maneuver. Realized that his interpretation of blood was not yet finished. Despite knowing that perfection wasn't necessary for her, and that being the strongest wasn't her goal, he remained indifferent. What truly mattered to her was having enough strength to keep her loved ones safe. He raised his gaze to the distorted shape perched atop the building. In his mind, the presence of the zombies held no significance. The true danger lay with the mastermind pulling the strings, and to restore peace, the only solution was to eliminate the leader. As a fresh horde of zombies surged in his direction, his lips curled into a confident smirk, and his eyes gleamed with a fierce red light. He found it almost laughable that anyone would believe such weak creatures could pose a real threat to him. Right after Joe spoke, a thunderous noise suddenly erupted from behind him. A sudden cold sensation swept through him as he spun around, catching sight of a zombie leaping toward. Before the creature could get close to her, Joe's mother swung her frying pan with force, striking the monster in the face and knocking it backward through the air. She hurried over to Bing Bing, concern etched across her face, and anxiously checked to see if had been bitten. Breathing hard, Bing Bing shook her head to show she was okay. She reassured that she was fine, then asked about, mentioning she had just seen him jump down. From the front yard, Jo-in shouted with excitement. The narrator spotted him, witnessing Jo-in's fearless actions as he effortlessly defeated zombies, resembling a real-life superhero. Confidence filled the narrator's thoughts, certain that Jo-in would be safe. Yet before her sentence could finish, a deafening crash resounded, filling the air with the sound of thunder. Jo-ling stopped in her tracks, her body suddenly tense. With deliberate slowness, she pivoted to face whatever was behind her. Amidst the rubble and swirling dust, lay wounded and bruised, bearing the marks of a fierce struggle. Struggling to rise, he warned Ron in a rough, strained voice to keep his distance and not approach. A massive zombie bear, mutated beyond recognition and looming at twice the height of a truck, blocked his path. Its menacing red eyes glowed in the dim light, while jagged shards of steel jutted out along its spine. With each exhale, mist curled from their lips as if they were a living chimney. The presence in the shadows wasn't merely observing, it was stalking its prey. Joe's body shook with pain, yet he pushed himself to his feet despite the agony. His fists tightened, and his determined eyes never left the beast before him. In that tense moment, he told himself that he alone could stand against this threat. He silently vowed to protect his family, refusing to let harm come to them ever again. Joshua's eyes glowed with a fierce crimson light while he poured out all the strength he possessed. Surrounding him, waves of scarlet energy crackled and swirled, raging outward with the intensity of an uncontrolled blaze. He planted his feet in front of the massive bear, his jaw tightly set. Determined, he resolved that if this was the day he would die, he would make sure to do so defending his loved ones. From the courtyard, Joshua's father, mother, and sister shouted desperately for him to retreat, their voices trembling with fear. But Joshua stood his ground, refusing to budge. The enormous zombie bear let out a thunderous roar and charged forward, slashing its claws through the air with deadly force. At the last possible moment, swiftly leaped aside, narrowly avoiding the powerful attack. Just as the claw was about to strike, a sudden, thunderous noise filled the air, interrupting the moment. In the aftermath of the crash, a recognizable voice spoke up, remarking with a hint of surprise that this kind of strength was within reach after all. The voice teased, admitting they had underestimated the other's abilities, having assumed there was a lack of effort. As the dust settled, Zhou Ming stood unfazed, effortlessly stopping the bear's massive claw with a single hand. He offered an apologetic glance to his younger brother, silently acknowledging the delay. Joshua's eyes grew wide, a mix of surprise and happiness lighting up his face as he recognized his older brother. Ming rolled his shoulders and wore a confident grin, reflecting on how it had taken him some time training in the mountains before he finally mastered this newfound strength. He turned his attention to Joshua, silently urging him to pay attention as he prepared to demonstrate the proper way to use it. With a swift motion, Zhou Ming flung the enormous bear high into the air, sending it tumbling away from him. The object hurtled out of control, barreling into a heap of wreckage with an explosive crash that echoed through the air, brushed away the dust from his clothes, and gave a sly grin. He noticed that his opponent was still conscious, and thought to himself that this large creature must have thick skin to survive, comparing it to a gigantic hamster. Zhou Ming glanced over his shoulder with composure, assuring the other person that he had the situation under control, and urging them to take care of the task that only they were capable of managing. Joshua's lips curled into a smirk, his gaze icy and unyielding as he acknowledged the message. He pivoted gradually, his gaze finding who remained poised on the far-off rooftop. A surge of memories from another life washed over him. Witnessing his family's demise, the echo of his powerless cries in the darkness, the overwhelming bitterness and seething anger, the nightmares that never ceased. But now, strength coursed through him, and he swore to himself that nothing would ever endanger them again. He would obliterate any threat that arose. Joshua moved ahead, his tone icy and cutting as he remarked on unexpected survival, pivoted with deliberate slowness, revealing that his previously lost arm had transformed into a monstrous claw, resembling that of a wolf. A harsh, guttural chuckle escaped him as he made it clear through his demeanor that he was no longer the same person they once knew. The former no longer existed. A reckless smile stretched across his face, his eyes gleaming with madness as sharp fangs became visible. With this transformation, his body had surpassed the boundaries of being human. He existed as a blend of zombie and human, possessing both sharp intelligence and unwavering self-control. Leading the horde with authority, he managed to retain his own thoughts. In this world overrun by chaos, he ruled as king. Beneath the building, a mass of zombies surged forward in a relentless wave, remained upright and composed, shutting his eyes as he reveled in the overwhelming force of darkness pulsing through him. A sly grin played across his lips. In his thoughts, he acknowledged unwitting help. If hadn't shredded the zombie wolf, never would have received the valuable crystal core so effortlessly. His tone deepened as a wicked smile played on his lips. He considered aloud the best way to return the favor for the generosity shown to him, announcing that he had at last made up his mind. A sharp metallic sound sliced through the air, But the attack ended before it truly began. Joshua struck with force, his sword cutting down swiftly. His head was cleaved straight through the center, sending a fountain of blood bursting from the wound. Joe slid his sword back into its sheath, his face emotionless. In his mind, he dismissed the other as nothing more than a coward who had simply grown bolder with words. He doubted that person had what it took to rule as king. He shifted his gaze away, surveying the chaos unfolding across the battlefield. With no longer present, he believed that his older brother would now face less strain in holding his position. A cold, unsettling laugh suddenly rang out from behind, sending a shiver through the air. Joe stood motionless, gradually pivoting to face behind him. His body was pushing itself upright once more. The wound on his head ceiling shut as skin throbbed and bones rejoined with disturbing, crackling noises. His eyes burned with a wild, crimson light. A twisted grin stretched across his face as his voice dropped to a menacing, inhuman tone. He let Zhuzh know that no matter how sharp her blade was, it could never end him. Joe's eyes grew large with surprise. In a swift motion, he lifted his blade and held it defensively against his chest, recalling the regenerative powers he had gained from the zombie wolf. Determined to finish the confrontation, he resolved to bring it to an end immediately. Just as he was about to attack, materialized silently at his side, moving with the stealth of a shadow. Leaning in close, whispered into Joe's ear, his words dripping with a poisonous undertone. He reminded Joe that they were alike and insisted that this moment belonged to both of them. The speaker extended an invitation, proposing an alliance where the deceased would become their servants. Together, they would use the living as a source of sustenance, envisioning a future where all of humanity would submit to their dominance like cattle. He motioned at the masses gathering below, boasting that he had prepared a special surprise by eliminating the weaker survivors nearby to ensure an impressive reception. The sea of zombies was already pressing against the fortress walls. Meanwhile, within the courtyard, Joe's parents, Bing, and the rest fought desperately to keep the invaders at bay. From the sidelines, Uncle called out to Joe, warning him that the west side was giving way. Joe's father struggled to catch his breath, sweat streaming down his cheeks. He tried to reassure himself that if he could endure just a bit more, and would soon bring everything to an end. Just as he struggled to find his breath, a sudden, thunderous crash rattled the earth beneath him. The enormous body of the bear slammed down next to him, sending a thick cloud of dust and blood billowing into the air. Zhou Ming's voice drifted from behind the wall, carrying a playful tone. He seemed to marvel at how much punishment the other guy could handle, and then suggested, half-jokingly, that they might as well use him to fix the hole. Zhou's father spun around, his face a mix of tension and relief, urgently asking Su about the condition of his brother and whether was safe. Zhou Ming surveyed the swarm of zombies approaching from all sides. Determination hardened his expression as he realized escape was impossible. He turned to his father and assured him with confidence that there was no need to worry. Joshua possessed even greater talent than he ever had, and he would see things through to the end. At the same time, landed another powerful blow on Joe, launching him through the air until he slammed into the ground with a heavy, painful impact. Dust burst outward as he lay sprawled on the ground, blood seeping from his mouth and his body bruised and broken. GS descended and perched on the broken debris, a sly smile spreading across his face. He appeared unimpressed by TC's efforts, silently mocking for failing to put up a better fight. Despite everything, the king offered forgiveness to his opponent, promising to pardon the act of rebellion if they would kneel in submission before him. Before he could finish speaking, a swift slash interrupted him. A vivid red blur sliced across the sky as he lunged ahead. His sword struck in the chest, the impact so powerful that it crashed through 3 solid stone walls. Dust continued to swirl through the air as remained upright and imposing. Her gaze was keen, and her tone carried a chill. She believed that humans should never associate with beasts, particularly those that threatened her family with bared teeth. He strode purposefully toward the collapsed form lying amid the debris, his sword stained with fresh blood. Speaking with a tone heavy with finality, he announced that there was just one task remaining for him to end life. His chest injury closed rapidly, healing in moments. He straightened, his posture imposing, and ran his tongue over his claw, tasting Joe's blood. His tone turned icy as he declared that it was unfortunate for Joe, and with chilling finality, he pronounced a sentence of death. In an instant, he sprang ahead, his claw slashing downward with the deadly speed of a guillotine. The weapon cut through the air with a fierce intensity as Joshua managed to lift his sword just in time. Metal struck metal with a sharp clang, sending sparks flying from the collision. The opponent moved with greater speed and strength, overwhelming Joshua. The strain made Joshua's arms shake as he struggled to withstand the pressure, feeling his endurance slipping away with each passing second. Blow after blow landed with unyielding force, as attacked without mercy. A sharp hiss filled the air as an intense pain shot through his arm, slicing open a deep wound that even his blood shield couldn't stop. He sprang into action, launching himself backward and coming to a stop a few steps away, his breaths coming in quick, heavy bursts. He examined the injury with a sharp, critical gaze, realizing that his blood shield was failing. The strain was obvious. He knew he was close to his breaking point. From across the battlefield, stood smirking as he ran his tongue along his claw. He admitted to himself that had managed to evade his attack, which was more than he had expected. Had honestly believed that, by now, he would be gazing at exposed intestines. Joshua noticed his energy slipping away, and his sight began to grow hazy. The once bright blood aura around him shimmered weakly, threatening to disappear. He lifted his gaze, locking eyes with the creature looming ahead, and tightened his hold on his sword. Determined to make his final attack count, he resolved that if he had just one swing remaining, it would be the one to decide everything. Before Joe had a chance to respond, materialized right before his eyes. A sinister smile curled on his lips as his eyes shone with a crimson light. He declared that Joe had been caught, admitting with a hint of mischief that even he was unsure of the extent of his strength when unleashing his full potential. Stood motionless for a brief moment, providing with the perfect opportunity to strike. His claw tore mercilessly across chest, leaving a savage gash. Crimson blood spurted from the fresh wound, splattering the earth below. At that moment, slipped his hand inside his coat. Summoning the last reserves of his determination, he hurled a homemade explosive directly towards face, silently daring his opponent to handle the unexpected attack. Suddenly, a thunderous explosion erupted as fire sprang up, quickly swallowing the surroundings in a blazing, fiery storm. Within the roaring flames, his voice rang out, her tone icy and filled with ridicule as she questioned whether a simple Molotov cocktail could truly end her life. As the haze dispersed, emerged without a scratch yet had vanished. Confused, paused and whispered under his breath before breaking into a sprint. He burst into laughter, the sound wild and unrestrained. A twisted grin spread across his face as he taunted HH, remarking that their blood gave off a vivid, unmistakable scent, like a bright flare piercing the darkness. He made it clear that hiding from him would be impossible. His smile disappeared, replaced by a chilling stare. He mentally promised that no matter how far she ran, he would track her down. In his mind, he vowed to destroy her slowly when he finally caught her. In another part of the city, Joshua slumped to the floor of a dimly lit convenience store. Struggling to breathe, he pressed his hand against the injury at his side. The sharp sting of pain mixed with the warmth of blood and cold beads of sweat, making everything around him hazy. Despite the agony, he refused to let go of the knife in his grasp, rested his weight against the chilly shelf, his gaze fixed on the injury marking his arm. The flow of blood had ceased, not completely mended, but significantly improved. A hint of astonishment crossed his mind as he realized blood possessed the power to heal. His sense of relief quickly faded as exhaustion overwhelmed him. He could barely muster any strength, knowing he had only a single action remaining, a final opportunity to turn the tide. Footsteps resonated outside the gas station, breaking the silence. His harsh, commanding voice soon followed, Mocking's choice of location with a sneer. He ridiculed her, remarking that even in death, some lacked style, and accused her of selecting her final resting place with the poor taste of a commoner. His sharp claw traced along the side of an old, rusted van, sending a shower of sparks into the air with each movement. The metal responded with a high-pitched, agonized screech. He moved with measured caution, his tone dropping to a calm, calculated murmur that carried the chilling patience of a hunter sharing the secrets of its prey. He wondered aloud if his listener understood the reasons behind a wolf's pursuit, questioning whether they realized wolves continued the chase even in the absence of hunger. Moved at a deliberate pace, his tone carrying a near-sacred awe as he saw the thrill of fear mingled with admiration. Each time his cunning plans shattered, his longing for success grew more frantic, only to be shattered again in a single, devastating instant. That fleeting second of utter defeat was what he savored most. A crooked smile stretched across his face as he drove his foot into a parked car. The impact sent the vehicle tumbling end over end, crashing down with an ear-splitting shriek of metal. His eyes dropped to the pavement, tracing the path marked by fresh blood. The trail ended at a nearly invisible tripwire, its surface catching the light with a subtle, oily sheen. Suspended overhead, a glass Molotov hung precariously, poised to fall with the gentlest disturbance. GS let out a sharp scoff, his grin stretching even wider across his face. He clearly believed it would be foolish to fall for such an obvious setup, refusing to step into the trap as if he were an oblivious fool. He lifted a claw with deliberate slowness, his gaze sharpening with suspicion. In his mind, he sensed that the most powerful trace of blood was emanating from above. With a burst of energy, Lin sprang upward, his claw tearing through the roof with a powerful slash. Steel and wood rained down from above as the ceiling broke apart, collapsing in a violent downpour. The ceiling suddenly collapsed, sending fragments flying everywhere, and through the swirling dust, a jacket stained with blood landed right in front of him. He grabbed the item with a puzzled expression, his eyes narrowing as he tried to make sense of it. To his surprise, it was a remarkable jacket. Before he had a chance to respond, events unfolded around him. Joe suddenly burst from the darkness, appearing directly in front of him with a rush of energy. With a swift, practiced gesture, he hurled a cloud of powder directly at its face, cried out in pain, pressing his hands over his stinging eyes as if trying to soothe the burning sensation. He desperately tried to understand what had done to cause him such agony. Moved forward, his tone level and icy. He pointed out that the substance was salt, questioning whether the other person could detect its scent. A faint, mocking smile appeared on his face as he remarked that the individual had lost the ability to smell, and furthermore, could no longer see. Advanced with a calm, icy tone, pointing out that the zombie wolf's power had passed on, along with its most significant flaw. A wolf possesses a nose packed with more than 200 million scent cells, allowing it to recognize upwards of 2 million unique odors. This extraordinary sensitivity makes the presence of salt feel unbearably painful. He stared intently at who was struggling in pain. He knew that many let their defenses down after believing they've uncovered a trick. In his mind, was just like the rest, claiming to be king, but proving to be nothing more than a foolish dog blinded by pride. His fury burned in his eyes as he shouted a threat at, swearing to destroy him and vowing to rip him to pieces. Joshua lifted his sword with steady composure, silently assuring his opponent that no opportunity would arise for them. A rush of blood energy coursed down his arm, surrounding his sword in a swirling red aura of strength. Blood, the sword known as World Splitter, descended swiftly, streaking the air with a brilliant crimson glow. A thunderous crash sent Lin hurtling into the ground, triggering a powerful shockwave that tore across the earth. A thick haze of smoke lingered in the atmosphere as the outline of the crater gradually emerged. Stood near the brink, gazing intently into the depths below. He realized he was still breathing and cursed under his breath, marveling at how difficult these monsters were to defeat. GLA lay battered and bloodied at the bottom of the crater, struggling for breath. Despite his injuries, a fierce snarl curled his lips as he defiantly clung to the belief that he was the king, unyielding even in the face of death. Something shifted in the atmosphere. Suddenly, his eyes grew large with surprise when he realized that a dark, viscous fluid was beginning to pool at his feet, filling the air with a sharp scent of gasoline. He demanded an explanation, his anger quickly giving way to alarm. His voice sliced through the strained silence, carrying a chill and steady tone. He regarded the small firebombs with disinterest, certain they posed no real threat. He paused beside the crater, his gaze lifting toward the sky. At that moment, he reasoned that it was worth seeing whether a completely filled fuel tank buried beneath the ground could send a creature like this one straight down to the underworld. He spoke in an even voice, showing neither anger nor fear, just a calm sense of inevitability. He declared that the gas station would serve as tomb, offering a final farewell before the explosion echoed through the air. At the village entrance, Joe's father waited with weapons ready, his stance alert. Without warning, a deafening blast echoed from the distant horizon, shaking the ground beneath him. He glanced upward, bewilderment written across his face as he silently wondered what was happening. In the distance, a dazzling sphere of flames erupted, casting light over the wreckage like a second sun ascending above the ruins. Joe's father remained quiet, his eyes fixed on the blazing light stretching across the horizon. He quietly noted to himself that the sun had already risen. Called out with excitement, drawing everyone's attention. The group shifted their attention as the swarm of zombies, which had encircled them throughout the night, began to pull back. When the deadly onslaught at last began to recede, the weary defenders allowed themselves a grateful smile, thankful to have survived. At the same time, Joshua gazed at the sun climbing over the horizon. A soft smile appeared on his face as he turned and began his walk toward home. A faint voice emerged from the area behind them. A pale figure, barely clinging to consciousness, slumped against the crumbling remains of a wall, silently pleading for help. Her strength faded, causing her head to slump forward. Stopped in her tracks, gradually pivoting to see Li Qin standing there. At their house, Joe crossed her arms tightly and shot a fierce glare at her brother. She questioned him in disbelief, wondering what kind of person would undress a girl in front of everyone, and accused him of behaving like a pervert. Let out a heavy sigh, his frustration obvious. He had only wanted to make sure hadn't been bitten. In his mind, bringing someone back just because they appeared unharmed was too risky. Far too many teams had been lost for making that very error. He insisted with a hint of defensiveness that he hadn't been wearing a shirt himself, making it clear that, by his reasoning, things were even. Joe's name escaped someone's lips, followed by an exasperated roll of the eyes. The words implied that his actions only made him seem even more suspicious. Relief washed over her as she realized she had intervened before things got worse. If Icy had witnessed his behavior, the situation might have been much more awkward. Joshua seemed ready to say something, yet before any words escaped him, the door beside beside him slowly swung open with a creak, emerged with a calm demeanor, assuring everyone of her well-being. She explained that she had already examined herself and determined there was nothing seriously wrong. The exhaustion she felt was both mental and physical, but she was confident that rest would help her recover quickly. She stopped for a moment and looked over at the pair with curiosity, wondering aloud why they seemed so unusual. Let out a cough and tried to smile, assuring everyone that nothing was wrong and expressing relief that the other person was safe. She acknowledged the situation with a simple nod of understanding, turned to face her, his tone softening as he expressed his gratitude for all she had done, dropped her eyes, and softly admitted that she hadn't done much, insisting that everyone else had put in all the real effort. Once they had taken a brief break, Tao, uncle, and got ready to set off. The group intended to search the village for additional survivors before nightfall, as fulfilling this responsibility was expected of them as village council members. Right before they departed, noticed the remorse in S's gaze and reassured her not to hold herself responsible. It was impossible for anyone to halt a wave of zombies before it began. Saving everyone was out of reach. Yet, as long as they remained among the living, hope continued to exist. Glanced over her shoulder with a gentle smile, silently acknowledging the gratitude with a nod of understanding. Inside a car, Zhou Ming let out a laugh, feeling impressed as he observed his younger brother. He acknowledged to himself that his sibling was at last beginning to communicate like a normal person. Observed as the group drove away, quietly noting to himself that at last the outcome had changed. Zhou Ming arched his eyebrow in surprise, clearly puzzled by the situation. He silently wondered what the other person could possibly mean, realizing he was matching their emotional intelligence, but deciding not to pursue the matter further. He let out a sigh before starting the engine, signaling that it was time to get going, since there were still bodies that needed to be taken care of. Together, they traveled by car toward the mountains, ready to begin the last stage of their cleanup efforts. Stood silently in front of the smoldering remains, his voice low as he explained the need to destroy the mutated bodies by fire. He worried that if any animals consumed the tainted flesh, it could lead to yet another catastrophe. Ming brushed the dirt from his palms, a wide smile spreading across his face. He felt relieved that they could at last return home and enjoy a proper night's rest. Before leaving, he reminded to drive the car through a car wash at the gas station, since it smelled unpleasant. Joshua rubbed his head in embarrassment as he considered the situation with a gas station. He furrowed his brow in confusion, suddenly questioning why he had been chosen. Zhou Ming draped his arm casually over the other's shoulder and flashed a confident smirk, asserting his role as the older brother and challenging anyone to object. Squinted intently, silently reminding everyone of the established rules. Zhou Ming arched his eyebrow in disbelief, silently wondering if his opponent truly believed they could still win against him. Felt the sting of mockery but remained confident, certain that no one had ever managed to beat him at Ghost Tag. They wasted no time putting their plan into action. Zhou Ming took on the role of Ghost Hunter while Zhou pretended to be the ghost. The instructions were straightforward. The hunter would close his eyes and count to 10, giving the ghost a head start. If the hunter managed to catch the ghost in less than 3 minutes, victory would be his. The ghost dashed away as quickly as possible, as unleashed his power and dashed ahead, let out a quiet laugh from behind. Found it amusing that would use that particular move, fully aware that he was just as familiar with the technique. Zhou had no time to respond before Zhou Ming appeared at his back. He sprang forward, reaching out to seize the boy, yet Joshua halted abruptly, spun his body with swift precision, and slipped away to the side, moving as silently and quickly as a shadow. The pair raced through the woods, springing over tangled roots and slipping between tree trunks, caught up in an endless chase. Without warning, Zhou sprang upward, setting his sights on the tree branch above him. Zhou Ming's eyes widened in astonishment before a sly grin spread across his face. He recognized the attempt to take the fight to the air, and silently acknowledged the clever move, but amusement danced in his expression as he prepared to respond. He suddenly rushed directly at the tree, giving no sign before he moved. At the exact moment, extended his hand toward the branch. A sharp crack split the air as the tree fell, hitting the earth with a loud, booming noise. Startled by the sudden sound, Joshua quickly steadied and made sure they both reached the ground unharmed. Zhou Ming stood behind him, a wide grin on his face and a blade held firmly in his hand, the evidence of his recent effort clear from the freshly cut tree at his feet. The pursuer believed the other had no hope of getting away, even by climbing to higher ground. Had just touched down when he sensed a tremendous presence approaching from behind him. He turned quickly, just in time to witness Zhou Ming launching the entire tree trunk in his direction. Folded his arms tightly across his chest, steadied himself, and managed to withstand the impact with all his strength. The two brothers stood frozen, one straining forward while the other pushed back, a visible tension sparking in the air between them. Let out a laugh that carried a hint of daring, his tone teasing as he questioned if his younger brother was planning to run away once more. Ignored his brother's playful remarks. He concentrated all his effort on stopping the falling tree trunk, his thoughts filled with awe at its overwhelming strength. Understanding that direct resistance was futile, he allowed himself to be propelled backward, using the movement to soften the blow. A few moments passed before the log collided forcefully with the cliff, sending a booming echo through the air as dust and wooden fragments erupted all around. Zhou Ming stood in the middle of the chaos, rubbing the back of his head in embarrassment. He wondered if he might have overdone it. He raised his voice, calling out to Joy to see if she had made it down, but was met with only silence. When the dust finally settled, he looked around but realized he was completely alone. A small pebble suddenly struck the top of his head with a sharp tap. Joshua's announcement echoed from overhead, declaring that the time had run out and that Ghost had claimed victory for this round. Zhou Ming lifted his gaze toward the cliff, surprised to spot someone above. He wondered aloud how the mischievous youngster had managed to climb up there without being noticed. Landed softly on the ground below, a wide smile spreading across his face. Meanwhile, the narrator pressed their back against the cliff to brace for the jolt, realizing many new things about the way their abilities functioned. Nodded in agreement, explaining that he had obtained his own by absorbing the core of a zombie, and assumed the other person had done the same. Joshua shrugged his shoulders in a relaxed manner, giving a nonchalant response that hinted at agreement. Privately, he reflected that it had actually happened in a former life. Out loud, he clarified that his talent seemed unique, as he had the capability to access the abilities of others. His eyes widened with astonishment as the realization dawned on him. He wondered if his abilities could truly be replicated by someone else, questioning whether it was more than just a simple coincidence. Joe gave a nod, confirming with a quiet agreement. He then considered the other person's power, recalling it as Blood Bastion. The ability enhances a person's strength, agility, and resistance to harm. The crimson aura surrounding the user acts as a shield against the majority of physical strikes. After analyzing their recent fight, the observer estimated they could mimic roughly 70% of the technique. Zhou Ming arched his eyebrow in surprise. He couldn't believe he had a 70% chance and still came up short, silently cursing his luck. Zhou went on to say that he could evaluate Zhou Ming's skills with surprising accuracy. Zhou Ming's eyes widened in confusion as he wondered aloud if they were now dealing with something like RPG character statistics, or if Joe somehow had access to his own personal interface. Flexed his fingers and explained that it wasn't quite like that. He described it as an instinct, a sense that allowed him to perceive the statistics underlying someone's abilities. He noted that, while an average adult would score about 20 in these stats, the other person's power and agility seemed to be close to 90. Their endurance, he estimated, reached about 95. When it came to intelligence, he hesitated, leaving the thought unfinished. Zhou Ming interrupted with a wide grin, expressing his curiosity by asking if the device could actually increase his intelligence as well. Joe Ish wore a smug expression, thinking to himself that Zero would be a more fitting name. He found it almost unbearable to watch the struggle with the tree stump. Then, Zhou Ming slung an arm over his shoulder, pretending to be threatening, and warned him to watch out. His so-called lack of intelligence might still be enough to land a punch. He suddenly recalled an important detail: the core crystal from the zombie bear. He had hidden it in the drawer, thinking it could prove useful in the future.